A young nurse donates blood to a stranger, unaware he's a millionaire single dad who will soon. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A young nurse donates blood to a stranger, unaware he's a millionaire single dad who will soon. Sophie stepped into the quiet hospital corridor, the faint hum of machines the only sound in the sterile air. She had just started her shift, the morning light filtering through the windows, casting a soft glow on the polished floors. Sophie was no stranger to the chaos of the ER, but today felt different. It was a normal day, yet her mind was preoccupied with the mountain of bills piling up at home and the looming uncertainty about her future. As a young nurse, Sophie had always felt like she was just getting by. The job she loved was rewarding, but the late hours and constant strain made it hard to imagine a future beyond the hospital walls. She had dreams, yes, dreams of opening a community health clinic, helping people who couldn't afford health care. But right now, all she could do was focus on her shifts and pay what little she could on rent and student loans. Sophie was walking toward the blood donation center when the overhead speakers crackled with an urgent announcement. An accident victim had just been rushed into the ER, and they needed immediate blood transfusions. It wasn't uncommon for Sophie to be called in to help in emergencies, but today, something about it felt different. She knew there was no time to waste. Without a second thought, she rushed to the room. Inside, a man lay unconscious on the stretcher. Blood had been pooled on the floor, his body bruised and battered from the car accident. Sophie quickly set aside her own nerves. There was no room for hesitation when someone's life was on the line. She rolled up her sleeve and donated her blood, a selfless act of kindness, as the team worked feverishly to stabilize the man. Her mind didn't linger on the man's face, nor did she ask questions. She simply did what was needed to help a stranger. She couldn't have known that the stranger she was saving was Matthew Stewart, a wealthy CEO of a tech company, a man who had built a fortune, yet had no idea that his life would soon be intertwined with Sophie's in a way neither of them could have imagined. As Sophie walked away from the donation room, she didn't think much of it. It was just another day at work. But what she didn't know was that this act of kindness would soon change her life forever. A few days later, Matthew Stewart, still in a coma, was in stable condition. His condition was improving slowly, but the doctor said it would be weeks, maybe months, before he fully woke up. Sophie had no idea who he was, but her memory of the blood donation was fading, until fate stepped in. One day, as Sophie was on her lunch break at the hospital's small cafeteria, she noticed a man enter the room. He was dressed sharply, with a dark suit and polished shoes, his presence commanding attention. He looked out of place here, amongst the nurses and hospital staff in their scrubs. She did a double take, her eyes narrowing in curiosity. There was something about him, something vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. He caught her gaze and smiled. Sophie smiled back awkwardly, not sure what to make of it. He walked over to her, and with a calm yet confident voice, introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Matthew," he said. "You're Sophie, right? The nurse who helped me last week." Sophie froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. Her mind raced as she tried to recall any patient she had worked on recently who might have known her by name. And then it hit her. "Wait," she stammered, looking him up and down. You're the man I donated blood for?" Matthew nodded, his eyes softening. "Yes, I am. I wanted to thank you in person. You saved my life." Sophie felt a twinge of embarrassment. "I didn't do anything special. I just helped out." Matthew's smile grew warmer. "No, Sophie, you did something amazing. You saved me, and I want to make sure you know how much that means to me." Her heart skipped a beat. Sophie wasn't used to receiving such praise. As a nurse, she had always been in the background, working hard without expecting recognition. Yet here was a man, someone who, by all accounts, had everything, thanking her for something that felt so ordinary to her. "What can I do to repay you?" Matthew asked, his voice sincere. Sophie's mind raced as she tried to formulate a response. She wasn't sure if he meant that as a simple gesture of gratitude or something more. But for now, she decided to play it cool, not wanting to give away how much his words had affected her. "I don't need anything in return," she said quietly. "It's just my job." Matthew looked at her, his eyes holding a hint of something more. "Well, I'll be in touch. You deserve more than you know, Sophie." As he left the cafeteria, Sophie couldn't help but wonder what he meant by that. Who was this man? And why did his words feel like they were more than just gratitude? Stay tuned, because Sophie's life was about to take a turn she never expected, all because of a simple act of kindness. Matthew Stewart's presence lingered in Sophie's thoughts long after their brief encounter in the hospital cafeteria. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that something about him didn't add up. He had thanked her for saving his life, but his demeanor, calm, collected, even charming, felt out of place. There was something beneath the surface she couldn't quite place, but Sophie was used to trusting her instincts, and something told her there was more to Matthew than met the eye. The days passed, and Sophie went back to her routine. The hospital was always busy, and her duties as a nurse demanded every ounce of her energy. But even in the chaos, her thoughts often wandered back to Matthew. Who was he really? And why had he sought her out to thank her? Her questions were answered sooner than she expected. One afternoon, just as she was finishing her shift, a message popped up on her phone. It was from an unknown number. "Hello, Sophie. It's Matthew Stewart. I hope you're doing well. I'd like to invite you to a charity event I'm hosting this weekend. It's for a cause I care deeply about, and I'd love for you to attend as my guest. Please let me know if you can make it." Sophie stared at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. A charity event? Why would he want her there? She hadn't done anything special other than donate blood. But then again, something about his invitation seemed sincere. She couldn't deny the curiosity building inside her. After a moment of hesitation, she typed a quick reply. "I'd be honored to attend. Thank you for the invitation." The weekend came quickly, and Sophie found herself standing in front of a grand venue, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never attended a gala before, let alone one hosted by someone as influential as Matthew Stewart. She had picked out her best dress, nothing extravagant, but a simple, elegant piece she had found on sale months ago. She felt out of place as soon as she walked in, the glittering chandeliers and the elegantly dressed guests making her feel like a fish out of water. But Matthew's smile when he saw her made everything seem a little less intimidating. "Sophie, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. He looked completely different in his tuxedo, effortlessly commanding the room. But when he spoke to Sophie, there was none of the arrogance she had feared. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, a little nervous but trying to hide it. Matthew gestured to a table by the window. "Please, sit with me. I want to talk to you more about the work we're doing." As the evening went on, Sophie found herself talking to Matthew more and more. The man who had seemed so distant and mysterious was starting to feel like someone she could trust. He told her about his passion for charity, his efforts to make a real difference in the world, and his love for his daughter, Emily. "I don't often talk about my personal life, Sophie," he admitted. "But I want you to know what you did for me. It meant more than you can imagine. I've been so caught up in work and business that I forgot what truly matters. You reminded me of what's important." Sophie listened intently, moved by his words. Despite his wealth, his success, and the power he wielded, he was opening up to her in a way she hadn't expected. But just as she was beginning to feel more comfortable, a voice interrupted their conversation. "Matthew, darling, there you are." Sophie turned to see a woman approaching their table. She was tall, elegant, and dressed in a dazzling red gown. Sophie's heart sank as she realized who the woman was. She had seen her in the photographs Matthew had shown earlier. It was Catherine, Matthew's ex-fiancée, and Sophie could tell immediately that she wasn't happy to see her. "Catherine, this is Sophie," Matthew said, his voice polite but with a hint of tension. "She's the nurse who helped me." Catherine raised an eyebrow, her smile tight. "Oh, how charming. The nurse who saved you." She turned to Sophie. "I must admit, I didn't expect someone like you at one of Matthew's events. But it's nice to meet you." Sophie could feel the tension in the air, and she knew right away that Catherine wasn't exactly thrilled to be meeting her. She tried her best to stay composed, but a wave of discomfort washed over her. Matthew seemed to sense the awkwardness and quickly stood up. "Let's get some fresh air," he suggested, offering Sophie his arm. They stepped outside into the cool evening air, the sound of the party still echoing behind them. Sophie could feel her heart racing. She had expected this night to be a chance to get to know Matthew better, but now it felt like everything had shifted. Matthew turned to her, his expression serious. I'm sorry about that. Catherine has always been complicated. But I wanted you to know that my invitation wasn't just about gratitude. It was because I think you're someone special, Sophie. Sophie was taken aback by his honesty. She hadn't expected him to be so open, especially after the tense encounter with Catherine. I don't know what this is, Matthew, Sophie said quietly. I don't know if I belong in your world. I'm just a nurse. Matthew stepped closer, his gaze softening. You belong wherever you want, Sophie. I've been through a lot in my life, and what I've realized is that the people who make a real difference don't always come from wealth or power. They come from the heart. His words touched Sophie deeply, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this connection than she had originally thought. As they stood there in the quiet of the night, Sophie felt her heart opening up in a way it hadn't in a long time. Matthew's kindness, his sincerity, it was all so unexpected. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness, a blood donation, could lead to something like this. But as she looked into Matthew's eyes, she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Sophie could not shake the feeling that the night at the charity event had shifted something between her and Matthew. After their conversation, she had tried to push away the emotions swirling inside her. She had always been a practical person, focused on what was right in front of her, but Matthew's words kept echoing in her mind. You belong wherever you want to, Sophie. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital shifts and routine. But no matter how hard Sophie tried to keep her focus on her work, her thoughts kept drifting back to Matthew. She had been shocked by the kindness he showed her, how much he seemed to care about her, and the fact that he had opened up in such an honest way. But the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. How could someone like Matthew, a man with so much power and wealth, be genuinely interested in someone like her? She was just a nurse, living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. He had everything she could ever dream of: money, influence, a family. And yet, he seemed to be drawn to her. Sophie had always been taught to be humble, to focus on helping others and not to expect anything in return. But Matthew was different. He wasn't just offering her gratitude for saving his life. He was offering her a chance at something more, something she had never imagined. One evening, after finishing a long shift, Sophie received a text from Matthew. Hey Sophie, I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me tonight. I know it's last minute, but I'd love to talk more. Let me know if you're free. Sophie hesitated, staring at the screen. Her heart raced at the thought of seeing him again. She could feel the pull between them, the undeniable chemistry that had been there from the moment they met. But she also couldn't ignore the fear gnawing at her. What if this was just a fleeting attraction for him? What if she was getting her hopes up for nothing? Still, her curiosity got the better of her. She quickly replied, I'd love to. What time? Matthew's reply was almost immediate. 7 p.m. I'll pick you up. At 7 p.m., Sophie stood by the door of her small apartment, adjusting her dress in the mirror. It wasn't fancy, but it was the best she could do with what she had. She didn't have time for a complete makeover, and honestly, she didn't want to be someone she wasn't. But she did want to look her best for him, even if she wasn't sure why. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She opened it to find Matthew standing there, dressed in a dark suit, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. You look beautiful, Sophie, he said, his voice warm and genuine. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Thank you, she replied softly. As they drove to the restaurant, the conversation flowed easily. Matthew asked about her work, her life, and even shared more about his own experiences as a father. Sophie was surprised at how much he opened up, talking about his daughter, Emily, and how difficult it had been to balance his career with raising her as a single father. You know, Matthew said, glancing at Sophie. Sometimes I wonder if all the success in the world is worth it when you don't have someone to share it with. Sophie was taken aback. She had always thought of rich, powerful people as being beyond that, immune to the struggles that ordinary people faced. But Matthew's vulnerability was unexpected, and it made her feel closer to him. They arrived at a quiet, upscale restaurant with soft lighting and a peaceful atmosphere. It was the kind of place where you could have an intimate conversation without the noise of the world around you. As they sat down, Matthew immediately took the lead, ordering wine and asking Sophie about her favorite dishes. They continued talking, laughing, and getting to know each other in a way that felt natural and comfortable. It was unlike anything Sophie had ever experienced. She had always kept her guard up, never allowing herself to get too close to anyone. But with Matthew, it felt easy. It felt safe. As the evening wore on, Sophie began to realize something. Matthew was more than just a wealthy CEO. He was kind, thoughtful, and genuine. He cared about the same things she did, making a difference in the world, helping others, and living an authentic life. But as they finished their meal, the conversation took a turn. Matthew's expression grew serious. "Sophie," he began, his voice low, "I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I feel like I've known you much longer. I've never met anyone like you. You're so different from the people I'm used to, and that's one of the reasons I'm drawn to you." Sophie felt her heart race again. She had been wondering if she was imagining things, if this was just another fleeting moment. But now, hearing him say this, she wasn't sure anymore. "I feel the same way," she admitted quietly. "But I'm scared, Matthew. I'm not sure if I belong in your world. I don't know if I'm the kind of person you need." Matthew reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring. "You belong exactly where you are, Sophie," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "And I want you to know, I'm not asking for anything from you. I just want to spend time with you, to see where this can go. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She had expected him to pull away, to realize that someone like her wasn't worthy of his time. But instead, he was offering her something she had never had. Real, unconditional acceptance. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I'd like that." The days following their dinner felt like a dream to Sophie. She found herself looking forward to her shifts at the hospital, not just because she loved her work, but because it meant she would see Matthew again. They had stayed in touch since that evening, exchanging text messages and talking on the phone whenever their busy schedules allowed. Their connection was undeniable, and Sophie felt something deepening between them, something that went beyond their differences in wealth, status, and background. Matthew had been kind, patient, and understanding. He listened to Sophie, really listened, in a way that made her feel seen and appreciated. For so long, she had kept her walls up, telling herself she was fine on her own, but with Matthew, those walls started to crumble. She wasn't used to letting people in, especially someone as important as him. But with each passing day, it felt more and more natural. One afternoon, as Sophie was getting ready to leave the hospital, she received a call from Matthew. His voice, as always, was warm and familiar. "Sophie, I've been thinking," he said. "I want to show you something. It's a surprise, but I think you'll like it. Are you free this evening?" Sophie smiled, already feeling a flutter of excitement in her chest. "I'm free. What's the surprise?" "I'll pick you up at 7. Don't worry about dinner. I'll take care of everything," he replied, his tone playful. "Just be ready to enjoy the evening." At 7 p.m., Sophie was waiting by the door, her heart racing in anticipation. She wasn't sure what Matthew had planned, but there was something thrilling about being with him, something that made everything feel possible. When the doorbell rang, she opened it to find him standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers. The sight of him always made her stomach flip. "You look beautiful," he said, handing her the flowers with a smile. "Are you ready for the surprise?" Sophie couldn't help but laugh. "I'm ready. What are you up to this time?" Matthew grinned and gently took her hand, leading her to the car. The drive was calm and quiet, the city lights flickering outside the window as they made their way to their destination. Sophie couldn't help but wonder what he had planned. She tried to guess, but nothing came to mind. When they finally arrived at a quiet park, Matthew parked the car and turned to Sophie. "We're here," he said. "Come on, I want to show you something." Sophie stepped out of the car, following him down a path lined with trees. The park was serene, the night air cool but comfortable. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. They reached a clearing where a small outdoor theater had been set up, complete with fairy lights strung between the trees and a projector screen set up in front. Sophie was surprised. "Matthew, what is this?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "I've been working on this project for a while," he said, his eyes sparkling. "It's a fundraiser to raise money for a children's hospital, and I wanted to invite you here because you've inspired me, Sophie. Your kindness, The way you've dedicated yourself to helping others. It's made me rethink how I can use my resources. So, I wanted to show you this. Sophie stood there, stunned. She had no idea that Matthew had been working on something so meaningful, let alone something so personal. The projector screen flickered to life, showing a video of children laughing, playing, and receiving medical care. As the video played, the names of donors and supporters scrolled across the screen, but what caught Sophie's eye was the final slide. It read, "In honor of Sophie Parker, for her dedication to healing hearts and lives." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. She didn't know what to say. She had never expected anything like this. The evening wasn't just about the surprise. It was about honoring her work, her kindness, and the life-changing impact she had on others. Matthew turned to her, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. "I wanted to thank you properly, Sophie. You've changed my perspective on so many things. You've reminded me that it's not about what we have, but how we use it to help others." Sophie's heart swelled with emotion. She had never been one to seek recognition or praise. But hearing Matthew speak from the heart, knowing he had used his wealth and influence to do something good for the world, it meant more to her than she could ever express. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Matthew smiled gently. "I wanted to, Sophie. You've made me realize that kindness can go so much further than I ever imagined." The evening continued with more surprises, music, laughter, and moments that brought them closer than ever before. Sophie realized that this wasn't just a romantic evening. It was the beginning of something deeper. Matthew had shown her a new world, one where love, kindness, and generosity weren't just words. They were actions that could change lives. As the night ended, Matthew walked Sophie back to the car, his hand in hers. The connection between them had grown stronger, and Sophie knew that whatever the future held, she wasn't alone anymore. "You've made this the most unforgettable night of my life," Sophie said quietly, her heart full. Matthew looked at her, his eyes warm and genuine. "I'm just getting started," he said with a smile. Sophie smiled back, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter that would be written with love, kindness, and the kind of connection she had always longed for. The days following that unforgettable night at the charity event felt like a blur to Sophie. She couldn't stop thinking about Matthew and everything he had done for her. The surprise fundraiser, the heartfelt gesture, it had left her feeling more than just appreciated. It had made her feel seen, truly seen, in a way she hadn't experienced before. Matthew's words echoed in her mind. "You've changed my perspective on so many things. You've reminded me that it's not about what we have, but how we use it to help others." Sophie wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone being honored in front of a crowd, but she couldn't deny the warmth that had blossomed in her chest when she saw her name on that screen. But even with all the kindness Matthew had shown her, Sophie still struggled with her own feelings. She hadn't allowed herself to believe in fairy tales, especially not one involving someone like Matthew. He was a millionaire, a successful CEO, and she was just a nurse, someone who lived paycheck to paycheck, doing the best she could to help people. Their worlds were so different, and Sophie wasn't sure how to bridge the gap. But Matthew was patient, and he didn't seem to care about those differences. He cared about her, Sophie, the person, not the title or the job or the money. It was a Saturday morning when Matthew called her again. She had just finished a shift at the hospital, her body exhausted but her mind awake with thoughts of him. "Hey, Sophie." His voice was smooth, like he had all the time in the world. "I was thinking we could spend the day together. Just you and me. I want to show you something." Sophie felt her pulse quicken. She hadn't expected another invitation so soon. It was still hard for her to believe that someone like him would want to spend time with her. But there was something in his voice, a sincerity she couldn't ignore. "I'd love that," she said, trying to sound calm despite the fluttering in her chest. Matthew's voice softened. "Great. I'll pick you up in an hour." When he arrived at her apartment, Sophie found herself nervous, unsure of what to expect. Matthew was dressed casually, in a simple jacket and jeans, but his presence was as commanding as always. He smiled when he saw her, and, as always, his gaze made her feel special. "You ready?" he asked, his eyes lighting up with excitement. Sophie nodded, trying to hide the nerves still racing in her stomach. They got into the car, and Matthew started driving in the opposite direction from where she thought they were going. Sophie couldn't help but ask, "Where are we headed?" Matthew glanced at her, his smile widening. "You'll see," he said cryptically. They drove for what felt like a long time, passing through familiar streets before the scenery started to change. The city skyline faded away, replaced by fields and greenery. Sophie looked out the window, intrigued, but still unsure of where this was going. Finally, Matthew turned onto a dirt road, leading them into a small, secluded area. He parked the car in front of a large, beautiful house that looked out over a small lake. It was peaceful, private, and quiet, the complete opposite of the bustling city life that Sophie was used to. Matthew turned to her, a playful glint in his eyes. "Welcome to my little getaway." Sophie's jaw dropped. She had no idea Matthew owned a place like this. It was stunning, and yet there was something humble about it too, something she hadn't expected from a man like him. "I wanted to share this with you," he said as they got out of the car. "I come here when I need to get away from everything. It's where I can breathe, and I thought you might enjoy the peace and quiet too." Sophie stood there for a moment, taking in the view. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm, golden light over the water. Everything felt surreal, like she had stepped into another world. "Matthew, this place is incredible," she said, her voice filled with awe. "But why show it to me?" Matthew looked at her, his expression turning serious. "Because I want you to be a part of my life, Sophie. I want you to see all of it, the good, the bad, the quiet moments, and the loud ones. I want you to know that I'm not just someone who's always on the go. I'm a person who needs someone to share his life with, someone who makes all of it worthwhile." Sophie felt her heart race at his words. She had known there was a connection between them, but hearing him say it so plainly made everything feel more real. "Matthew, I don't know what to say," she whispered, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. "You don't have to say anything," he replied softly. "I just want you to know that I'm here. And I care about you, Sophie. I care about you in a way that I never thought I would care about anyone." The weight of his words hit Sophie like a wave, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. As the evening wore on, they spent time walking around the lake, talking about their hopes, their dreams, and their pasts. It wasn't a fairy tale, and they weren't perfect. But in that moment, Sophie felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something beautiful. Matthew's hand found hers as they walked back to the house. He didn't say much, but the way he held her hand spoke volumes. They didn't need words to know that what they had was something rare, something worth holding on to. And as they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the sky, Sophie knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone in this world. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind for Sophie. Every moment she spent with Matthew felt like a dream. He continued to surprise her with thoughtful gestures, like taking her to private art galleries to view the latest exhibitions, or planning quiet weekends at his lake house, where they would simply relax and talk about everything and nothing. It was easy to forget the world around them, to lose herself in the way Matthew made her feel seen, heard, and valued. Yet, as much as she appreciated every moment with him, there was a growing sense of uncertainty in Sophie's heart. She had never been someone who relied on anyone, let alone a man with so much wealth and influence. Sophie had always been independent, focused on her career and dreams. The idea of depending on someone, especially someone like Matthew, was unfamiliar, even frightening. But every time she questioned the direction their relationship was going, Matthew would reassure her with his gentle words and warm gestures. He never pushed, never rushed her. He was patient, understanding, and kind. And despite her fears, Sophie couldn't ignore the way her heart fluttered every time he held her hand, or how his presence brought a sense of calm to her chaotic life. One evening, as they sat on the porch of his lake house, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Matthew turned to Sophie with a serious look on his face. "Sophie," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I need to talk to you about something." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had learned by now that Matthew's serious tone often preceded something important. She sat up straighter, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What is it?" Matthew took a deep breath, his eyes locked on hers. "I've been thinking about us, about what this all means. I know we've been spending a lot of time together, and I can't help but feel that we're growing closer. And I want to be honest with you, Sophie. I'm not just looking for someone to share my life with. I'm looking for someone I can build a future with. Someone who will be there for the long haul. Sophie's chest tightened. His words hit her like a wave, pulling her under with their weight. Matthew, she whispered, unsure of how to respond. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheeks. I know this is moving fast, and I don't want to pressure you. But I need you to know that I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. I've spent so much of my life focusing on business, on making money, on building an empire. But it's all meaningless if I don't have someone to share it with. Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. She had never heard him speak so vulnerably before, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. She didn't know what to say. I want to be that person for you. Matthew, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know if I'm ready. I've always been independent. I've never let anyone in, and I don't know how to do that. Matthew's eyes softened as he leaned in, kissing her forehead gently. I don't expect you to change overnight. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I want to be with you, Sophie. No matter what that looks like. I want to help you with your dreams, be there for you, in every way. Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes, and she blinked them away quickly. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back, how much she had been afraid of letting someone in. But hearing Matthew's words, feeling his unwavering support, made her question everything she had believed about herself. Maybe she didn't have to do everything alone. Maybe there was space in her life for love, real love, the kind that was patient, kind, and unwavering. I've never had anyone believe in me the way you do, Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. I'm scared, Matthew, but I want to try. I want to see where this can go. Matthew's face lit up with a smile that made Sophie's heart swell. He leaned in and kissed her softly, his lips lingering on hers for a moment longer than usual. It was a kiss full of promise, full of a future they were about to build together. Then we'll take it one step at a time, he said, pulling back to look into her eyes. No rush. Just you and me, figuring this out together. Sophie nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She had spent so much of her life resisting the idea of letting someone in, of relying on anyone. But with Matthew, she realized that love wasn't about dependence, it was about trust. It was about being there for each other, supporting each other, and sharing life's ups and downs. As the night fell and they sat there together, wrapped in each other's arms, Sophie knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear, but she wasn't alone anymore. Matthew was by her side, and together, they would face whatever came next. The stars twinkled above them as they sat in comfortable silence, and Sophie felt her heart open in a way it never had before. For the first time, she truly believed that love could be everything she had ever dreamed of, patient, kind, and full of promise. The weeks after Matthew's confession were some of the most peaceful Sophie had experienced. She could feel the walls that she had built around her own heart slowly crumbling, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly open up to him. Their connection deepened, not just because of what they shared, but because of what they had both been willing to face together, the painful past that had shaped them. Matthew, too, seemed to be transforming before her eyes. He was no longer the man who hid behind his wealth and success. With Sophie, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to share pieces of himself that he had kept locked away for years. Sophie could see that he wasn't just in this for the love, but for the healing, for the chance to rebuild not just his career, but his life and his sense of self. One evening, after dinner, Matthew invited Sophie to a quiet spot by the lake, their favorite place. It was a warm, clear night, and the stars above them seemed to mirror the peace they had found together. Sophie, Matthew began, his voice soft but steady. I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About everything that's happened. Sophie turned to face him, her heart racing. She had felt this moment coming. The moment when everything between them would shift to something even deeper. I know we've been taking things slow, he continued, his gaze not leaving hers. But I want you to know that I'm all in. I'm ready to take the next step. I want to build a future with you. A real one. Not just the kind of future I've always known, but a future where we're together, where we support each other, and where we build something meaningful. Sophie felt her breath catch in her throat. She had imagined moments like this, but now that it was happening, she couldn't quite believe it. Could it be real? Could she really be ready to commit to this man who had opened her heart in ways she never thought possible? "I'm ready too, Matthew," Sophie whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I know I've always been afraid of giving up control, of letting someone else in. But with you, it feels different. I want this. I want us." Matthew reached out and gently took her hands in his. The tenderness in his touch made Sophie feel safe, as though the entire world had faded away, leaving just the two of them, here, together. "I promise," he said softly, "that I'll be there for you. Through everything. You've already changed my life in ways I never expected, Sophie. You've given me a reason to believe in love, in us, and in the future." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes as she looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. For so long, she had carried the burden of her own fears and doubts. But now, with Matthew, she felt ready to embrace what lay ahead. As they stood there, hands intertwined, the moonlight reflecting off the water, Sophie knew this was just the beginning of something incredible. They had both been through so much, but together, they were stronger. They had learned to trust, to heal, and to love in ways they had never imagined. The next few months were filled with new adventures, new challenges, and new milestones for them as a couple. They traveled together, explored new projects, and spent quiet evenings in each other's company. They faced life's obstacles not as two individuals, but as a team, united in love, in purpose, and in their shared vision for the future. And then, one warm spring afternoon, as they stood together on the balcony of Matthew's lake house, he turned to Sophie with a smile that spoke volumes. "Sophie, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air, simple and profound, just like their journey together. Sophie's heart swelled with joy as she realized that, after everything they had been through, every moment of doubt, every moment of growth, this was the life she had always dreamed of. A life built on trust, love, and a promise to always be there for one another. "Yes," Sophie whispered, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." Matthew smiled, pulling her into his arms, and in that moment, Sophie knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together, forever. Sophie spent the next few days reflecting on everything that had happened with Matthew. It felt like their relationship was moving at a pace she hadn't expected, but there was something about it that felt right. Despite her initial hesitation, she found herself embracing the idea of building a future with him. Matthew's unwavering patience, kindness, and his genuine care for her made her realize that maybe she had been wrong all these years to believe that love couldn't be a safe place. It wasn't long before the question that had been lingering in Sophie's mind for weeks finally came to the surface. Was she ready to fully commit to this? Was she ready to open her heart completely, without fear? That night, Matthew invited her to another one of his charity events. This one was different. It wasn't just a fundraiser, it was a grand gala, with high-profile guests from all over the city. As she got ready for the evening, Sophie couldn't help but feel nervous. The idea of being in such an extravagant setting, surrounded by people from a world so different from hers, made her feel small. But then, she remembered Matthew's words. He had always made her feel like she belonged, like she was enough. When Matthew picked her up that evening, he looked at her with a soft smile as he handed her a small bouquet of flowers. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Sophie smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves that still lingered. The gala was everything Sophie had expected and more. The room sparkled with chandeliers, and the guests were all dressed in the finest attire. As they walked through the venue, Matthew introduced her to several people, and Sophie did her best to keep her composure, though she still felt out of place. But as the night went on, something changed. She wasn't just Matthew's date. She was Sophie, a woman who had made an impact on his life, and it became clear as the evening progressed how much he valued her. It wasn't just about status or appearances. It was about who she was on the inside, someone kind, genuine, and real. As the night drew to a close, Matthew took her hand, leading her outside to the terrace. The view of the city skyline took Sophie's breath away. Matthew turned to her, his expression serious yet soft. "I know this might seem fast, but Sophie, I want you to know something." He paused, his hand gently holding hers. "You mean so much to me. I want you to be with me, not just for today, but for the rest of my life. I can't imagine my future without you in it. Sophie's heart fluttered. The words she had been longing to hear finally spoken aloud. The fear that had been holding her back, fear of trusting someone so completely, began to fade. She realized that Matthew was offering her more than just a relationship. He was offering her a partnership, a future. With a soft smile, Sophie looked up at him, her voice steady. I want that too, Matthew. I want to be with you. I'm ready. Matthew's face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes. Then let's do this, Sophie. Together. As they stood there, hand in hand, looking out at the city, Sophie realized that the journey they were about to take together wasn't about the grand gestures or the lavish events. It was about the quiet moments, the trust, the partnership, and the love that they would continue to build. And for the first time in a long time, Sophie believed in the kind of love that was patient, kind, and full of hope, a love that could weather anything that came their way. The following weeks were filled with a sense of calm and excitement that Sophie had never experienced before. With every day, her bond with Matthew deepened. They had both found a rhythm in their relationship, one built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared vision for the future. Sophie had learned to embrace the love Matthew offered her, allowing herself to feel safe in his arms. And Matthew, in turn, learned how to slow down, to appreciate the small moments that made life meaningful, rather than just chasing after success. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the lake house, the sun setting in the distance, Matthew turned to Sophie with a glint of excitement in his eyes. Sophie, there's something I've been wanting to ask you, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what was coming, but she could sense that this was a pivotal moment. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. What is it? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Matthew took her hand, his fingers gently brushing against hers. I've spent so much of my life thinking about what I wanted to accomplish, what I needed to build. But the only thing that matters now is having you by my side. Sophie, will you marry me? The world seemed to pause for a moment. Sophie's heart raced as the weight of his words settled over her. She never expected this, not in a million years. But looking into Matthew's eyes, seeing the sincerity and love that shone there, she knew without a doubt that this was where she belonged. This was the life she had been waiting for, a life with him. Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded, her voice breaking as she spoke. Yes, yes, I will marry you. Matthew's face lit up with a smile that could light up the entire world. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he never wanted to let go. I promise you, Sophie, I will love you every single day for the rest of my life. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Sophie realized that love had a way of finding you when you least expected it. It wasn't always perfect, but it was real. And together, they had created something beautiful, something worth cherishing forever. Their future together was just beginning, and Sophie knew that no matter what came their way, they would face it as a team. Because when you find someone who truly cares about you, who accepts you for who you are, and who believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself, that's the kind of love worth fighting for. And Sophie was ready to fight for it, every single day. The sound of laughter and joy filled the air as the sun dipped below the horizon, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of a beautiful new story. The story of Sophie and Matthew, a love built on trust, kindness, and a promise to always be there for each other, no matter what.